My name is Traci Ruiz. I am a retired Lansing Police Lieutenant. Overview today, we're going to talk about legal definitions. Reporting, where do you report? Case studies, we want to respect elder rights, and I want you today to learn from our mistakes. In solutions, as you know, you're already working in aging services. The solutions to a lot of these problems, we have to get creative, right? Reminders, some of these might be, you might already be aware of them. If not, we have to remember that it takes patience, a lot of patience when dealing with vulnerable adults. This is oftentimes when I deal with my peers in law enforcement, this is what they struggle with. 26 years ago, about when I hired on the police department, I can remember responding to calls, domestic violence calls, and we would go and let's say usually the victim was a female, the female's beat up. And I can remember my training officer telling the person, okay, you over there, stop beating on her. You know, you two get along, stop fighting. If we have to come back, somebody's going to jail. And we'd literally walk out of the house, building, apartment. And then about within 6 months of me hiring on that department, the law changed. Domestic violence laws were put on the books. And then what you saw was, we had an assistant chief that said, basically, you will make an arrest if you know a physical assault has occurred, and if you don't, you will be disciplined. So we went from very lackadaisical to, we know he beat her up, to all of a sudden within 6 months, you will make that arrest. So there was a learning curve, but what's interesting about this, without those laws on the books, we wouldn't have been able to take the strides that we have with domestic violence cases and helping victims. We are here with elder abuse. Why don't we see that as much? Why don't we see the correlation or the connection? When the monies were being given back around 2003 or so, there were large pots of money that were coming in for domestic violence training, sexual assault training, and I worked very closely with the people in my area. And I would say to them, hey, you know, we have elders that really need help. And they're like, this pot of money's over here for domestics, or this pot of money's over here for sexual assault. And I'd say, but I do have other victims that are getting abused by a loved one, someone that lives with them, might have formerly lived with them. I go down the legal points, and they're like, So we had ageism at its best, and it's still continuing, as many of you know. So how can we make a difference? It takes all of us in this room doing what you're doing right now. So again, thank you for being here. So my point to that, my long point is, people would say, why are you doing this? Because it's the right thing to do. How can we walk in and see that there's a problem and turn our back on it? We're living in a generation where, how ironic is it that we're caring for, many of us are caring for kids and our parents or grandparents. Persons are living to an older age, so educational awareness is going to be the big key to make strides or changes in vulnerable adult issues or abuse. So legal definitions: elderly 60 plus in Michigan, vulnerable adults 18 or over who require care. Exploitation in its misuse of adults' funds. How many times do you deal with a caretaker, a family member, where they feel entitled because they're helping so-and-so, and so they think they should have access to their money? Neglect. Usually we're seeing this where they're withholding food or medications. Those are the biggies when I was going on cases. Abuse, harm or threatened harm. It includes non-accidental physical, mental injury, sexual abuse, or maltreatment. So I put up here 3 keywords: physical, sexual, and emotional. How many times do you deal with patients or clients and they say to you, I'm getting abused, and you're asking them about the situation, and what it comes down to is it's verbal abuse. How many times are they being degraded? It is a crime, but I can tell you I have yet to see one prosecuted. We always ask, who are those mandatory reporters? St. Joseph County did a vulnerable adult protocol, and they listed these out, which I thought were very helpful. So healthcare services, educational services, social welfare services, mental health services, other human services, which is those providing services to the disabled and aging, such as information referral and adult daycare. Law enforcement, county medical examiner investigators, and physicians. That is a broad overview on who are mandatory reporters, I should say. So anybody in here tell me who, if you suspect abuse, who is your first agency to report to? Okay, great job. So mandatorily, you're supposed to call Adult Protective Services first, okay? So APS, Please lock it in. Adult Protective Services is who you must call. It is the law. Mandatorily, you are required to call Adult Protective Services first and foremost, and then Adult Protective Services then calls law enforcement if they feel there's an issue. So failure to report. Anybody know what the penalty is for failing to report a child abuse? It's the crime that occurred. So if you have a misdemeanor crime for child abuse, you can be charged with a misdemeanor if you fail to report that crime. Okay, does anybody know what the penalty is for not reporting a vulnerable adult abuse?
Not one.
There is not one. You are correct. It is not a crime. It's a $500 fine. Vulnerable adult population, they experience abuse more often than their non-disabled peers. A high percentage will experience repeat victimization. So if you don't report something that you suspect might be an abuse, I can assure you that if they were a victim once, it's likely going to happen again. And if the perpetrator was not prosecuted or there was no reporting on that, you can bet that perpetrator is going to commit the crime again. Why would a vulnerable adult fail to report these issues if they did suspect abuse or they knew that abuse was occurring to them? Many of them are embarrassed. There's a lot of verbal abuse that goes on where they say that they're stupid, they're ugly, nobody's going to believe them. If they tell on them, they're going to be sent to a nursing home. How difficult would it be at any age to prosecute a family member? It's terrible, and it's agony for these vulnerable adults. I mean, many that I've dealt with that are abused, repeatedly abused, do not even want to prosecute. So consequences, or some may not be able to do so. How many clients or patients have you dealt with that might be bedridden and they can't get out, they can't report, they can't go to court? So I can't get around this Crawford ruling. Who are my legal people in here? Anybody know what the Crawford ruling is? Raise your hand. Okay, so basically what it says is an accused has the right to confront their accuser. The other red flag, what does that person have when you're dealing with them? If you go into their home, do they have proper food in the fridge? Does anybody in here, let's take a show of hands, does anybody in here look around when they go in homes? Raise your hand. Yes, I love it. Good job. I want you to look around. The biggies are the medications. Are they on medications? Are they getting the prescriptions filled? Do they have what they need for medications, and are they taking them, right? Another biggie, the refrigerator. The fridge tells a big picture. If you open the fridge door and you only see beer cans in there and you know your client doesn't drink, who else is in that household? Where's the money going? Where's Social Security and pension going? We have many of those cases where it's not going to that vulnerable adult. So furniture, is there furniture in the house? Is this just a flap house where people are using drugs and maybe seating that elderly person in a wheelchair and they have no place to sleep? Is the shower being used or the bathtub being used? Or is the sink full of clothes in the bathroom where it looks like they're only washing clothes there? Can that vulnerable adult get out on their own? Are they wheelchair bound? Who's bathing them? These are many red flags that can go on. And an elder that doesn't have means for support, you know, if they are relying on this other caretaker or if they're relying on some type of financial means to help support them, this is a big deal to try to cut it off, as you may know. So injuries, bruising, if you've seen injuries or bruising on your clients that don't match statements that they're telling, it's okay if you report and it doesn't end up being an abuse case. We have those. Sometimes there's self-harm, self-neglect. If someone loses a spouse and they lose the will to live and they stop eating, can we do anything about that? Can Adult Protective Services? No. Evidence considerations, look at the bruising. What does the bruising tell you? What's the big picture that's painted? He says one bed fall, the husband says one bed fall. But the picture, does it seem logical to what he's telling you to what we're seeing? Normally I'd have you guys work through these cases, but I told Carla for sake of time, I'm gonna just go through them. So I hope you guys are okay with that. Photos, you can never have enough of them. If you're at a hospital, they usually have sexual assault nurses. Those sexual assault nurses are specialty trained. Medical treatments, and I put these up here for our law enforcement if there's any in the crowd, but I'm gonna fastly go through these. Medical treatment, consider sexual assault nurses if you suspect there's a sexual assault. Medical expert, it's really critical that you have some type of medical expert to examine that person's body if you're in on a case. If you're at a nursing home or assisted living, you may not have that luxury. They may be transported to a hospital, and then it's going to be up to law enforcement or APS. But it's very helpful when someone can provide a medical rendition to how they think those injuries occurred, because that is going to be used later on for court. Additional considerations. Medical, you need to document caregivers. People will say they're caregivers. Please, 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 when you're in on these cases and you're writing your reports, or you're in your offices or environments where you're coming across the client, if somebody says, I'm the caretaker, please take the next step to say, and what is your name? Where do you live? And what is a contact number I can, in case I have any further questions. Interview the patient separately. Law enforcement, I want them to check and see where the incident occurred. Social workers or advocates are critical in these cases. Investigative partners, these are all in your handouts. But Adult Protective Services, I give you the number in that resource guide so you have it. Again, I encourage you to laminate it, and then you can keep it for as long as you need in your briefcase or wherever you carry your paperwork. Attorney General's office often gets involved with nursing homes, home for the aged, or adult foster care. Their number is included in that handout as well. Residential safety, first and foremost. Does anybody in here go into the homes? Raise your hand, please. Okay, first and foremost, before anything else, number one is your safety. Okay, I want you to think about that. If you are not alive, you can't provide services to people, right? Synergistic approach. There are so many places that you can spread this information in word. It can be at union meetings, it could be your neighborhood watch, your business watch, your church groups. The possibilities are endless on what you can get creative with and who you can let know. Again, takes all of us to get creative and report. Other questions?
We'll give you a round of applause.
Thank you.